Welcome to the latest edition of Beyond the Arc. I'm John Gonzalez alongside, he's becoming a regular here at Beyond the Arc from CBSSports.com, Brad Botkin. What's up, man?
Not much. Olympics just got over. I'm happy to be back. One downside is it's 2,000 degrees in Miami right now, and my air conditioning's down. So if my if my thoughts are scattered right now, this is some form of torture.
That's like Bikram yoga, the hot yoga that you're doing only without the exercise benefits. Do you have like fans or anything?
I do. I'm trying to not run them to not mess up the audio, but it barely puts a dent in it. It's intense right now in Florida.
Oh no. Oh man. Well, better you than me. We're glad to have you back here. By the way, before we get into this, we're going to do division deep dives. This is going to start our division deep dive series today, and then we're going to continue it this week and next week with our CBS Sports insider Bill Reiter. But before we do that, we had you on. It was you, me, and Sam during the Olympics, and you had a very spicy take about Steph Curry and Steph Curry not showing up in big moments. And then he went supernova in the gold medal game with like, I think 1 million threes, one of which arced over two players, like this rainbow shot that he hit. What were you thinking during that? And do you want to recant your previous testimony?
No. So I've been catching a lot of hell for this, and we've got to set the record straight. I only said if he continues to not shoot well, I thought it was a reasonable question of should he continue to play big minutes. So clearly that became not a question when he shot well. But I think if I would say anything, I would say that I probably should have given more credence to the fact that you have to leave him in there for one of these games to happen. And, we were getting down to crunch time. There was only 2 more games to do it big, but he did it, and he did it in the fashion that only Steph Curry could do it. I mean, I was super happy for him. I think I always take a little bit of a pessimistic sort of like, like a dad would like, I love the guy so much. And I think I'm a little harder on him sometimes than I need to be because I want him to be good so bad. And I think I carry a little bit of that shoulder chip that I think he probably has. I've heard people say for so long that he's not quite in the category. And I feel like as a defender of him, I sometimes am looking for him to do too much. I exaggerate his struggles a little bit because I'm like wanting him to do good. And so at the end, for him to do what he did in that moment on that stage, I was super, super happy for him because there's no question he was feeling the strain of the Olympics and his performances to date until he did what he did against Serbia. But when he gets going like that, and that's part of the thing with Curry is it's not just the production, it's the pyrotechnics of it all. It's that.
Oh, it was amazing.
Nobody can score 36 points the way he scores 36 points. And that's what I was most happy to see, especially against France. And that shot you talked about where he basically shot it straight to the moon. I mean, he can do that. And he gave us that.
I can't believe he got that shot off.
Yeah, it's incredible. And the thing is Durant and LeBron were both wide open. He's the only guy in basketball history who can take that shot with 6 seconds on the shot clock with 2 of the greatest players of all time wide open, 1 pass away, and nobody bats an eye. It's not an acceptable shot. It's an encouraged shot. Incredible. I was super pumped for him that his only Olympic showing didn't end up being a dud, and it ended up being a lot more than that. So. I probably jumped the gun a little bit in questioning if he should be out there, but he was playing pretty poorly. Just happy that it turned around for him.
Clearly you motivated him. He's a big fan of BTA and he heard you.
No question.
And it was motivation. And I didn't hear the words mea culpa from you there, but it felt like it. So we'll just chalk that up to that.
I did as good as I could do.
As good as you could possibly do. All right. So as I mentioned, we're going to begin our series of division deep dives starting today. We're going to do it all this week and then all next week. I've got the Eastern Conference. Bill's going to handle the Western Conference next week. We're going to start with Brad and the Central Division today. And we're going to begin with the Milwaukee Bucks. Last year, 49-33, third in the Eastern Conference. In the playoffs, absolute disaster. No Giannis. He was injured. Dame was in and out. Chris Middleton was intermittently good and available. They lost in the first round, though, to the Pacers 4-2. Pacers obviously went on to the Eastern Conference Finals. Last year, Brad, 6th in offensive rating, 19th in defensive rating. In the offseason, they add Taurean Prince, Gary Trent Jr., and DeLon Wright, all on one-year deals. They lost Malik Beasley, and they are super into the second apron. A lot of things going on with the Milwaukee Bucks here. Let's start with last season and what you thought happened, because I think they had high hopes, right? They went and got Dame Lillard. All of us were super jazzed up. We thought it was going to be a big deal. And then the wheels came off and they had a good record. They ended up firing the coach and bringing in Doc Rivers.
Yeah. So in my way of spicy takes, I had another one at the beginning of last year when Damian Lillard was just starting out with the Bucks and he was kind of getting his sea legs under him. And he's never been a good defender, but he was awful defensively. I cut some tape at the beginning of the year. Yeah. He wasn't getting back on defense. He wasn't getting over screens in any way. I mean, just effort stuff. He was really bad. And I wrote that he was not only playing to make the Bucks a championship team, but I thought he was sort of playing for a whole archetype of point guards, because it's becoming so vital. Guys like Tyler Hero and these guys, Josh Giddey was spotlighted for the Thunder. He became unplayable in the playoffs. These guys that can't defend, every year they get more and more spotlighted as offenses become more and more adept at hunting them and singling them out and using them to cripple an entire defense. And I kind of thought Damian Lillard was playing for the Trae Youngs and the Kyrie Irvings and basically anybody not named Steph, the James Hardens that can be a superstar and still be a championship level, give the car keys to them. They run your team when they don't defend. And I think that the jury is still out on that. When they got rid of Drew Holiday, they just said, we think offense is more important than defense. We don't think our late game offense is dependable enough. Chris Middleton's getting older. He's really the go-to half-court guy when they were winning their championship. And they just didn't think they could do it without more offense. And so you're right. They rise up to near a top 5 offense, but they go down near a bottom 10 defense. And it's a big trade-off. So I think that question still has to be answered. It was the biggest problem for the Bucks. They were doing some weird stuff with Brook Lopez.
How do they answer it? I mean, last year, their idea was, hey, we're going to go get Patrick Beverley, and that's going to help us with our point of attack defense. And their perimeter defense was absolute, as you mentioned. I mean, Dame is not a good defender. And they think, okay, well, we'll fire the coach. We'll bring in Doc. Doc will address the defense. We'll go get Patrick Beverley. Maybe that'll help a little bit. And perimeter defense especially was abysmal. And they're kind of locked into this team unless they unplug Chris Middleton. I don't even know what you could get for him right now. That's right. And there was some talk that Brook Lopez might be on the block. He made some sense, I thought, for some teams, and they might use that to address some of their perimeter flaws. Gary Trent's a huge pickup. Then you lose your rim protector. He's been great defensively.
No, I know. And so there's a trade-off. When you're above the second apron, you have no cap space, you have no flexibility in that regard. They dumped all their trade assets in the Holiday deal to get him in the first place, or in the Lillard deal, I'm sorry, and then also to get Holiday. So they're strapped. And so I guess this is a roundabout way of saying this is a second run. Again, I do think getting Gary Trent, who's not a great defender, he's better than Malik Beasley.
He's good. I like him.
And DeLon Wright's a legit defender. The problem is, and a lot of teams do this, like, okay, the Magic got KCP. He's going to play big minutes for them. He's going to be in crunch time minutes for them. So they already have a ton of defense, but he can add real leverage and sway to say a team that didn't have defense. Orlando does. But DeLon Wright, we'll see about Gary Trent, but these aren't guys that you probably want in your closing lineup. And so you can say, same as Patrick Beverley. They bring a little point of attack defense, but you're not playing Beverley or at least you don't want to be in high leverage situations. And so it's a little bit deceiving when you quote unquote address your perimeter defense by bringing in 15-minute players. So we'll have to see with that. But I basically think this is another year for Damian Lillard to prove that you can be good enough See, that was the thing with Lillard last year, bad defender, but he just didn't play that well offensively either relative to what he's supposed to do. So if he goes out and shoots 42% from three, becomes a little bit more comfortable off the ball in a second year, and Giannis goes crazy and Middleton comes back, the formula that they can outscore you is going to get another opportunity to prove itself.
Ultimately, I mean, look, I like adding Gary Trent. DeLon Wright, fine. What you said is absolutely correct, that, okay, it's good to have these guys as rotation pieces. You don't want to be closing with these guys.
Right.
So ultimately what happens here is, can Dame and Giannis work? Can they be the duo that we anticipated that they would be? Because you are forfeiting. Look, when they moved on from Drew Holiday, who was, I think, like inarguably their second best player when they won their championship, everybody went, oh, but you're upgrading with Dame, and Dame's like, he's a supernova offensive player, and imagine the pick and roll with him and Giannis, and it's going to be amazing and whatever. The difference is Drew Holiday might not be the offensive like supernova that Dame was at one time, but Drew Holiday doesn't hurt you anywhere. He's good pretty much at everything. He might not be like excellent, but he can be a guy who could have a big scoring game. And then there's no like downside to having Drew Holiday on the court. There has been, as we've seen defensively, at least, somewhat downside to Dame. So, I mean, they don't even need him to be a good defender or an average defender. They just need him to be not a super minus defender, because he hurt them last season. And then offensively, those two guys, I don't know what it was, and maybe you have an idea on this, but like I anticipated that they were just going to run a ton of pick and roll with those two, and it was going to be unstoppable. And it wasn't, and they didn't.
Okay, two things on that. And this is, I mean, my guy in the producer chair here, we're talking about the Warriors and Steve Kerr and his refusal to run pick and roll sometimes. You know, there's more and more of this throughout the league as we see that these heliocentric offenses, unless you have Luka Doncic, is very, very difficult to keep winning. James Harden, it's very difficult for that to play out the string all the way down the stretch of a playoff run. It becomes predictable. And I think that the league is moving more and more toward a European style of ball and player movement basketball. And I think the Bucks wanted to do that. The second thing is Giannis wasn't quite as comfortable as a short roller as we thought he would be. You know, guys like Draymond Green, Bam Adebayo is really good at it. Ben Simmons was fantastic at it when he was okay and doing his thing. But these guys that can catch on that short roll when Dame or Steph or Trae Young are getting double teamed out high on the court, and then they make the play. That's what allows you to run that pick and roll over and over. And he wasn't super comfortable making that pass to the corner, going in on 4-on-3 and not just sort of putting his head down and going into traffic and having a real sense and feel for what to do with the ball in space. So again, second year, he got a little better at that when Doc Rivers came in. I think more repetition more than anything helped that. But some of this, John, to me, is as great as Giannis is, the reason they had to go out and address the offense, or they felt that they needed to, is Giannis is not a complete superstar. He's a superstar, but he is not somebody that you can give the ball to at the top of the key and guarantee yourself a good shot. And they lacked that when they can't just lean on Chris Middleton to create half-court offense. They said, we got to get somebody that can command a double team on the perimeter and loosen this thing up for us, because Giannis at the top of the key with an entire defense with 10 eyes on him, and he really just puts his head down and tries to do the bull in a China shop thing. His jumper was coming along a little bit from the mid-range, and he's basically abandoned that again. So it's very tough to have consistent half-court offense when that is your guy that's at the point. And so that's why Lillard has to be the guy to do that. But in order to run, because they could run some inverse stuff and have Lillard be the screener. They can try to get creative, but that all leans upon Giannis being able to be the decision maker, handle the ball. So mostly I think they're gonna go back to more. And Doc Rivers loves pick and roll. He did it with Harden. He probably overdoes it, but I think they'll lean heavily on that. They'll put Dame more back on the ball. He wasn't totally comfortable off, and for that to work, I would say the biggest offensive factor to watch this year for the Bucks is Giannis in the role. Because in theory, it's like, oh my God, Giannis is a super athlete. He can roll to the rim and Dame's going to throw lobs and it's unstoppable. But that's not really how it works. They wall up on it. The corner guys sink in. And they're not going to let him catch it right at the rim. It's going to be a pass over the top to the free throw area. And he's going to have to make a finesse play in space. And if he gets good at that, then the Bucks become a real problem, because then you're like, okay, I can't double Dame because Giannis is making the right play on the 4-on-3. If he's not making that play, the Dame attention becomes less valuable, and the offense becomes not as scary down the stretch of a game when you know, because that's why Jokic is so good. And these guys, they just guarantee you shots at the end of games in intense situations. And the Bucks, they can't guarantee themselves that shot right now.
I know that hindsight is 2020 here, but everything you said is correct. But especially with regard to Giannis, right? The solve for Giannis or to boost Giannis is to put more shooters around him, right? And instead they decided to bring in Dame, and they locked themselves in cap wise, and it was just really poor planning. Like look, Dame is an incredible player. I love watching him, and I get the idea on paper of, hey, two massive superstars, and Dame is obviously an upgrade over Drew offensively, but contract wise, Drew was on a better contract, and when they were going to extend him, as we saw with what Boston did, it wasn't going to be as cost prohibitive as what ends up happening with Dame and Chris Middleton and Giannis, where they're locked in on this second apron. And like, they should have just extended Drew Holiday and added some cheaper shooters around him. That would have made way more sense. That, like, for them not to plan for the new CBA and to lock themselves into this situation where, like, you can't detonate it because you've got Giannis. And I guess you can unplug Chris Middleton, but I don't know what you're going to get for him because he's been injured and he's been like intermittently available / useful. I don't know what the solve is here beyond just, hey, Dame and Giannis figure it out. Then they look like what they thought, because that's basically, they put themselves on this path and they have to go forward on it. And there really isn't any other recourse. I'm just less bullish on it than I was a year ago. Before we go to a break, let's do the best and worst move and moment from this team over the offseason. You get to go first. Best move or moment for them.
I think it's got to be Trent. I mean, it remains to be seen, how much that'll actually swing their needle. But getting him on, I think he got a minimum, right?
Yeah.
I mean, he's like a $10 to $15 million player. So a lot of these guys, I don't know if they overplayed their hand or the market dried up for other factors. But with the second apron in play, I mean, some of these guys are getting squeezed out. And so Trent's worth a lot more money than that. He will help. He goes back to playing with Dame. That's kind of when he first made his name in the league, with Portland, with Dame. And so I think getting him is, to be honest, getting all three of those guys when you have basically no flexibility was, I thought, a pretty good summer context, certainly relative to context. But I'm kind of with you. They're more fringe pieces. And I think the core of the team is going to have to be just better, because the Bucks, I think if I summed up what I think they did this summer, and it really started when they went and got Doc Rivers, they went from deciding how is the best way to win basketball games, and Drew Holiday is always the best way to win a basketball game, and they went down the fantasy route, where you just trade for the big name. And you trade and you bring in the big name coach. There's a lot of evidence that Doc Rivers is not the guy to get your offense or your defense right. He's just known as a guy who's like a big name coach, and he's good, quote, good with star players. So, I mean, I think that's a little bit oversold, but he's a big name. And they said, okay, we need to go out and get a bit. And they did the same thing with Lillard. It's like the Clippers bringing in James Harden. I didn't think they needed to do that, but it was a fantasy move. Let's put the biggest names and biggest players we can together. And I think I'm with you. I'm not terribly bullish on it, but they do have to make it work because they don't have a lot of pieces to get out of this.
I totally agree. My best move was the same as yours. Getting Gary Trent on a vet minimum is fantastic value for them. And especially because, and the worst move for me is that they put themselves in this situation, right? Because you couldn't go out and get anybody else. You are in the second apron, and not to get too wonky on the second apron, but just to explain for people who maybe aren't as in the weeds as you and I are about this. If you're in the first apron, you can't do sign and trades. There's no trade exceptions. You can't take back more money in trades than you send out. And then the second apron is all of that. Plus you can't aggregate salaries, which is hugely helpful in trades.
That's the crippler.
It's hugely helpful. Now it's got to be a 1-for-1 deal. And you're like, all right, well, that doesn't really help me. Right. You can't trade cash. You can't take back a penny more than you send out. Picks get frozen 7 years out. If you're in the repeater tax, that pick goes to the back of the line. It just goes on and on and on. And first apron, you can't sign on the buyout market. You're limited there as well. So it's just like, it's a hugely restrictive thing. So the Bucks are basically really locked in here. I assume that's your worst move and moment too, that like basically this is the team and like good luck, fingers crossed.
Yeah, I do think it was, I was excited like everyone else, like, oh my God, I love Damian Lillard. He's like mini Steph. But I think that getting yourselves into the situation, and we can't really ignore the fact that they were feeling the heat of Giannis leaving. And so that always, sort of clouds your judgment a little bit.
Yeah, they had to do something.
Yeah, and they did make a move. So we give teams hell all the time that don't pull the trigger. The Blazers were one of those teams for years. Like, oh my God, make a move. And so, we kind of want our cake and eat it too. But in hindsight, they I don't know how great of a move that was for them.
If you could go back, you would absolutely go back and undo it. And on top of that, and they couldn't have known this. And at the time, I was praising them. Hey, they're taking a big swing. Good for them. They went and got Dame. But they couldn't have known that Drew would get rerouted to one of their chief rivals in the Eastern Conference. It's an absolute disaster of a move unless something changes this season. We're going to take a quick break, and then on the other side, we're going to continue our division deep dive. We're doing the Central Division today. Up next, we'll do the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Indiana Pacers as we work through the Central. It's John and Brad Botkin here on Beyond the Arc.
You hear that? It's the steady pulse of the world's game that's turning fans into family and sport into passion. You hear that? It's the heartbeat of American soccer. The USL on CBS Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Beyond the Arc. John Gonzalez and Brad Botkin. You can find us wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Please download, subscribe, and leave a review as we continue our division deep dives, beginning with the Central Division. We just wrapped up the Milwaukee Bucks. Now we're on to the Cleveland Cavaliers. They finished 48-34 last year. That put them fourth in the Eastern Conference. They lost in the second round to the Celtics 4-1. Now you'll remember, Brad, they finished 16th in offense and 7th in defense. It was like nominally not a bad season for them, except for at the end of the year, they had a chance to finish as high as second. And instead, they decided to tank into the fourth spot so they could face the Orlando Magic. They thought that they could, handle the Magic easier than another team, which ended up being true. They beat them in a 7-game series, but they're one of only 3 teams this offseason that did not sign a free agent or make a trade, the other 2 being the Celtics and the Lakers. Celtics obviously won the championship. They didn't lose anybody, and then they re-signed Jared Allen, Evan Mobley, and the big one was getting Donovan Mitchell to stick around. They got a lot of decisions to make here.
Yeah.
On, what they're going to do this season with the bigs, and Darius Garland is still there, and does he work with Donovan Mitchell? But the big thing was they got Donovan Mitchell to stick around.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a big win. Donovan Mitchell is just a stone cold superstar, especially in the playoffs. It sucked that he was hurt at the end. For them, I don't think it would have made a difference. But yeah, getting him to commit whenever one of these guys goes to one of these teams that it feels like a layover, where like they're going to get traded from their one team, but you feel like the ultimate destination is the big market team, and they're just sort of stopping over. And he kind of made that not the case. He's probably locked in there for at least 2 more years, which to your point brings up, what are they going to do with Garland? Because Cleveland last year was at their best, and they were really good. When Garland and Mobley, I think it was Mobley, were out, and it was Allen and Dame. And I'm not Dame, Donovan. And they basically recreated what Utah did with Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. And they had Strus, and they started to get some better shooting from Okoro. And they brought in a little bit of shooting last year to address that 3 spot. And they were working. They were really working when they didn't have the redundancy in the backcourt and in the front court, which is very difficult matchup-wise to overcome. And so that's where I was surprised that they didn't look to deal. I think you knew they were going to bring back Mobley just for age reasons. I was surprised that they didn't, and maybe they still will. But Allen and Garland, to me, seem to be super, super valuable players that the Cavaliers just happen to have a positional saturation. And so I still think they're gonna look at that. Very difficult to win with a small backcourt like that at the highest level. But the Cavs are a good team. I think Kenny Atkinson will do some good things with them.
I like Kenny Atkinson a lot.
I do too. He kind of cut his teeth with with development in Brooklyn, and but he's got that experience with the Warriors, and I think he'll be good. And I just think at the end of the day that this team is still a big trade away, and they have the piece to do it. And I think they'll be motivated to do it with this 2-year window with Donovan Mitchell, because Darius Garland's really good, and he could help a lot of teams, and so is Jared Allen. But I think they'll look at that sample of season last year where they were playing with one star ball handler and one big, because then they can put 3 shooters around, and that's when the spacing comes out and Donovan becomes almost unguardable in the pick and roll. And I think they'll use that as their blueprint as they try to round out their team with trading. I would guess Garland would be the more tradable guy than Allen.
Yeah, and they have more flexibility here. They're $17 million under the first apron. They're not a tax team right now, so they're not handcuffed. I mean, like, they're pretty good situation flexibility wise, and they did lock down, as I mentioned, Jared Allen and Evan Mobley and Donovan Mitchell. So they've got these guys under contract, and then they've got to figure out what's going on with Darius Garland. I want to see Kenny Atkinson, because what you just said is absolutely right. In that stretch where they had one big and one guard, and then they just put shooters around it. It was like, oh yeah, sometimes we get too complicated with basketball and we try to do too much. And it's like, this just makes sense. It's pretty simple, right? You're going to have one guard and one big and shooters. That just makes sense from a stylistic standpoint. I want to see Kenny Atkinson come in and see how he staggers them, because there was 2 seasons ago now, or was it 3 seasons ago? 2 seasons ago, where they had that wonky front court where they had Lauri Markkanen as well as Kevin Love and the 2 bigs, Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. We're just running a huge front court out there, and it was kind of fun, but it didn't really work. This time around, they've got really good pieces, so let's see how Kenny Atkinson deploys them. And then if just staggering their minutes between Mitchell and Darius Garland and then Allen and Mobley doesn't work, then I think it's time where you go, okay, front office time. Like, Darius Garland's a good piece. He could help a lot of teams, as you mentioned. He's super tradable. Let's unplug him and figure out what, the swap would be.
I agree.
I
agree. The one thing about that is what we were just talking about with Trent and DeLon Wright, and them being a little bit deceiving because they addressed that. You try to spin it into a positive, like, oh, they're perimeter defenders, but they're not going to be main guys. And so same thing with Garland and Mitch. Everybody always talks about staggering minutes when you have 2 like people. And it can help in the regular season for sure. But in crunch time, you got to play those guys together. And so we love to talk about, oh man, they can never have not an elite point guard on the court. And that does help for sure. But the ultimate question is how they play together.
Yeah, for sure. And it's the East, so they've got a little bit more wiggle room here. I still think their ceiling isn't all that high, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were right on the heel. I'm pretty high on the Orlando Magic taking a step forward this year, but it wouldn't surprise me if the Cavs are right there with them. Let's do best and worst moments from the offseason for them. I think the best moment is pretty obvious. Convincing Donovan Mitchell to stick around is pretty significant. What do you got for worst moment?
I mean, did they do anything? I can't, maybe maybe not making a trade. They didn't do anything.
Yeah.
So, I think this is still an off season that is unfinished. This is like, if you're grading it, it's probably an incomplete. I think, a team like the Cavs raises an interesting question, and they're certainly going to contend for a title, or else they wouldn't have made the trade for Mitchell. But there's always these teams that in Orlando, they're young, and so you can qualify it that way. But there's always these teams that are good. And we gave the Wizards hell for this for years with Wall and Beal, and we gave the Blazers hell for this for years with McCollum and Lillard. And it's like, ultimately it becomes a question of, do you want to be good? And are you happy being good? And being like the Pacers last year, where if a bunch of stuff breaks your way, you can go to the conference finals, but you're probably on paper not a conference finals contender. Is that okay with you? Because it gets pretty easy to say that, I was almost in the camp last year of dude, they should trade Mitchell, even if he doesn't want to be traded, because it's like they get a ton for him and they can build out around Garland. And I think they might be a better team given the return that he would bring. And there's always this question of, do we go for the superstar? And if we have the superstar, do we sell out to keep him? when it probably just keeps us on the treadmill of, a little bit above mediocrity. And it's really a philosophical question that almost every team ends up having to answer, because very few teams get the opportunity to add a player and the right supporting roster to then go into the 4 or 5 teams that say, hey, they can win a title this year. Like the Sixers did it, by getting Paul George, but it took them 3 years to get their books clear and to get off Harden and all that stuff.
And that could have failed too.
Yeah, it could have. So it's really a philosophical question. And a lot of teams in the West right now, the Pelicans, the Grizzlies, that are kind of right. They're good teams, but it's so deep. It's like, are they contenders? What do you do with that type of team? I think fewer and fewer teams are choosing to be good, because it's very hard to put that team back together and not kind of, hey, we're not contenders, let's bottom out. Now, the rub of that is when you do what the Bulls have done, they should have given up 3 years ago, but they kept trying to be good. So it's a really fine line. And right now, Cleveland, I think, is sort of walking it. They're good. They have a superstar, but they probably still need a lot of things to break their way to really be legit.
Yeah. And, if I'm Cleveland, absent having LeBron James, I think good is probably your ceiling. Maybe I'm underrating Donovan Mitchell. I think getting him to stick around, I'm sort of surprised that he decided to do that. But that's why I think the worst move or moment for the offseason for them was sort of like not. I mean, I guess what they're doing here is, hey, we're going to bring in Kenny, and let's just see, as I mentioned earlier, if him staggering these guys will end up sort of boosting them a little bit, but not picking a direction on the bigs or the guards, and just sort of standing pat and deciding our offseason is going to be completely focused on just re-signing our guys, and then we'll just kick the can down the road a little bit and we'll figure it out by the trade deadline. Maybe that's the smarter, more prudent move. I don't know. But I really do think good is sort of their ceiling. And another team in the Central Division that I think good is kind of their ceiling, and you mentioned them earlier, is the Indiana Pacers, who last year they were just a good team, right? They surprised everybody with their offense. Everything broke right for them. They ended up on a good side of the bracket. They end up beating the Knicks when the Knicks were worn down, go to the Eastern Conference Finals. That is best case scenario for the Indiana Pacers. That was a great season for them. I have some friends who work in that organization over there. They were thrilled, and they should be. They ended up finishing the regular season 47-35. That put them 6th in the East. As I mentioned, they went to the Eastern Conference Finals, 2nd in offense, 2nd in pace last year. Disastrous defense. Couldn't defend anybody, but didn't really matter because they were just sort of fun, right? I mean, like Tyrese Halliburton, we didn't see him in the Olympics, but when he was healthy at the beginning of the year, especially when they went to going around the in-season tournament time, that team was like, oh, we've got something cooking here. And then they end up trading for Pascal Siakam, and they signed him to a 4-year deal for just under $189 million in the offseason. Extend Nembhard, extend Obi Toppin. This is, when you're talking about those good teams, Brad, this is like the top of the good tier, the good teams tier.
Yeah, the Pacers are, to me, the Sacramento Kings of the East. It's just the Kings have a tough,
an interesting comp.
It's like, and it obviously you have the tie-in with the Sabonis and Halliburton trade, but I think that those teams are almost the exact same teams, and they're in the same place in their development. They're trying to be the same thing. They're building in a similar way. Behind just a lightning point guard and trying to put some shooting around it, and defense is always the question. So I think they're the same team. They're just in a little bit. The East is getting pretty tough, but a little bit easier division. But to me,
we say this every year, though. We go the East is good, and then it isn't.
I know. Well, the thing is the bottom drags it down. So the bottom 4 teams are so trash, but I've been lobbying to get rid of conferences for years. I think one day they'll do it, but I just think the familiarity of the playoff matchups is getting stale, and you just don't have the same path there. I think when you want new fans, this is a tangent, but when you want new fans, it's like I don't think that you just want to see the Celtics and the Heat it's like and the NFL I think needs it too. It's like, how do we never see Kobe and LeBron in the playoffs? It's like we're on because of tradition, I guess. It's like we're taking away, I think, so many opportunities for these awesome matchups that could take place, where you could have Sixers Clippers in the first round. You could have, Bucks Mavericks, where I this is a total tangent, but yes, the East is always weaker. It's just never going to be the West. I don't know if that's geography, why the better players tend to always end up there. But
conference wise, like the travel is obviously a concern, right? I mean, if you
it
take
is,
away
but
the
you could, I
conferences.
think I've done an article on this a couple of times. You could do baseball series for one in the regular season. But the key thing is the playoffs. Let's say the worst matchup you could end up having in the playoffs if you didn't have conferences is Portland, Miami. And the worst one, I believe, in conference is Portland, Memphis. And so the difference between those two series of Portland going to Memphis and Portland going to Miami, or vice versa, is just switching it back to 2-3-2. It's when you have to go on that one game. To fly back across the country. I tracked the miles traveled, and you would be flying significantly less if you went to 2-3-2 going from Portland to Miami. So that argument doesn't hold water. I think it's really actually just too radical of a move at the moment. But for the purposes of our discussion, the East is weaker, and I think that's the reason that we look at a team like Indiana and say, hey, if things break right. To me, the danger of Indiana, and it took a long way to get here, but I think they're in danger of being the 2021 Hawks, where they're super, super fun. They're built behind this point guard that when he gets hot, he can take over a game, but he's flawed. He doesn't play defense. And everything went right for them. The bracket broke right. You remember that 21 Hawks team? They got the Ben Simmons meltdown. They got the Knicks team that was overseeded at 4 and couldn't create any offense besides Julius Randle playing bully ball at the elbow. So they had these flawed, overseeded teams. And Trae Young got super hot, and they end up in the conference finals. But they're probably not a conference finals team. And what did they do when they got done with that? They re-signed Nate McMillan. They didn't trade John Collins. They bring back Capella, and they don't make any moves because it's like we're a conference finals team. What did the Pacers do? They brought back all their guys. They brought back Obi Toppin. They probably signed Pascal Siakam to too big of a deal, but they had to sign him to that because they gave up 3 picks.
Absolutely had to.
They exactly. So I think they're a little bit in danger of now because expectations are always the root of frustration. And now the expectations, while we still give it the qualifier of, they're probably not a conference finals team. Hey, they were in the conference finals. And so now if they go back to the play-in, which is entirely reasonable, and it's going to feel like a massive disappointment. And that's exactly what happened to the Hawks, is they went back to where they were supposed to be. They're a flawed team. If Trae Young isn't going supernova and the matchups don't break your way, you're a play-in team. And they started to think of themselves as a conference finals team and therefore didn't make any changes. So I'm not a front office guy. I'm not a great salary cap or who was available or who wasn't. So maybe there wasn't anything to do. But bottom line is they brought back their same team, and it would not be surprising at all if they are in the play-in this year.
Yeah, it wouldn't. I think that they're just like, when I look at the Eastern Conference, we talked about them, the Eastern Conference getting more talented, deeper, better. I think that those like first 8 teams are like just solid. And then after that, like it's going to be a pretty big drop off. It would surprise me. Well, I guess the 7 and the 8 is really what we're talking about for the play. I think that's basically their absolute floor. I would be super shocked if they fell below that.
And I wouldn't be surprised if they're 5 or 4. I mean, maybe Orlando drops. Maybe Miami really is done. Who knows? But yeah, I think that thinking of them up there with Boston and Philadelphia and maybe Milwaukee or the Knicks which is where you kind of have to think about them now, because that's who you're going to have to beat one of those teams to even go to the second round.
For sure.
And so
that's difficult.
That's difficult.
I mean, they were kind of always going to go this way though, right? I mean, like they trade for Pascal. Of course, they're going to re-sign him. Getting Nembhard on that deal, it's actually a really good deal.
Oh, I love Nembhard.
And a very useful player. And, bringing, your mileage may vary on Obi Toppin. Fine, whatever. But they were never going to overspend beyond that, right? I mean, they're $3 million under the first apron. That's going to be Indiana. They're the Indiana Pacers. First of all, the free agent class wasn't great to begin with. Paul George was obviously the crown jewel, but beyond that, like there's not a lot of people. I'm guessing I like Indianapolis just fine.
That's right.
But I'm going to guess that there's not a lot of people beating down the door to go to Indiana or Cleveland or some of these like Midwestern mid-market teams, right? So
and how much money? I don't know how much money did they have. I don't know if they even had. I'd have to look at it, but I don't know if they had a ton of money. And then once you go past those people that you need a ton of money for, you get into Gary Trent. And so I don't know. I'd have to look at it deeper to know what they actually could have done.
Yeah, I just know that now they're $3 million under the first apron, and they're probably thrilled with that. Let's do best and worst before we take another break. Best move for them over the offseason. Was it Nembhard for you or Siakam? Because it sounds like you're not crazy about the Siakam deal.
No, I just think I think he's exactly what they need. They need the second scorer. He's a versatile defender. He's really good in transition, which is how they play. So I think he's good. I just think in a vacuum is probably not what they gave him. Same as OG Anunoby with the Knicks, but context matters. So I think, honestly, if you're asking me what I like best about the Pacers going into next season, it wasn't a move, but getting Ben Mathurin back, because he's the guy that they didn't have in the playoffs. He's a big wing defender, which is what they need really desperately. Pascal addresses that to some degree, but Mathurin can really address it with his athleticism and his size. He's really strong. So I think if we're talking about off-season additions, effectively he is one, because when they go into the playoffs next year, if he's healthy, he actually makes them a different team. I don't know how much different, but other than that, they just brought back the same guys. So I think getting Mathurin back is effectively their off-season move.
I'm on Siakam. I just thought, it's great that he's sticking around. It's another big piece, and he looked really good running with Halliburton. Worst move for me. Yeah, worst move for me, or moment, really, worst moment, was just Halliburton at the Olympics, just getting mothballed. Although he got a free ride to Paris, which is pretty amazing.
You called that. You said he was on a free trip. I actually thought he's so freaking perfect for the FIBA game. I thought he was going to get in there and just Kerr wasn't going to be able to take him out. He was going to just start running up and down and creating shots. And I really thought that was how it was going to go. But you were right. And I loved how he addressed it afterwards when he said, you don't do anything on the group project. He really leaned into the bit. I thought
he handled that
cool.
extremely well.
Yeah,
he handled it extremely well. If I was him, I'd be a little bummed out that I went and I made Team USA, and it's amazing. And I'm one of the 12 best American basketball players out there. I'm wearing USA across my chest, and they're like, "Thank you for coming. We're not really going to use you. I hope you enjoy your time here in Paris." We're enjoying our time here on Beyond the Arc. We're going to take one more break, and then on the other side, we're going to get into the dregs of the Central Division. That means we're talking about the Chicago Bulls and the Detroit Pistons. You don't want to miss that. Don't go anywhere. This is Beyond the Arc.
Football action continues. Are you ready for this? Ready to take chances? As the gridiron is taken over by the Great White North. It's time to storm the fortress. It's time to fight on the battlefield. Catch the Canadian Football League on CBS Sports Network.
All right, welcome back to Beyond the Arc. You can also find us on YouTube. Our page is at Beyond the Arc CBS. Please hit the like button, leave a comment, subscribe. We've got a ton of content over at YouTube. Please check that out. All right, we're into the Chicago Bulls now. This is a team that really drives me insane, Brad. Finished 39-43 last year, 9th in the East. They beat the Hawks in the play-in. Then they lost to the Heat, 19th in offense, 22nd in defense. I was begging them to do something, and then they did something, and it was terrible. They go and trade for Josh Giddey. They unplug Alex Caruso. Oklahoma City, I checked this. They have all the picks. They have like a million picks. Everybody was like, okay, well, if you're going to trade Alex Caruso, you can get a lot of picks back from any team. And certainly you could get a lot of picks back, or at least some picks back from Oklahoma City. And they got exactly no picks back. This offseason, they ended up turning Alex Caruso, DeMar DeRozan, and Andre Drummond into Josh Giddey and no picks. Explain to me what the hell they're doing.
Well, it's like the Rewatchables podcast, when you get ahead to like picking nits or whatever, like we just jumped way ahead to worst move. This is the whole offseason was a disaster. They should have traded, I touched on this earlier with these teams that get hypnotized by being good. They don't want to sink, and they think they have the play. They've been doing this since they brought in Rondo and Dwayne Wade, and now they stuck with Levine and DeRozan because there was a little bit of hope when Lonzo Ball was healthy, and they looked decent through the first part of that season. So it's like, oh man, we just need to get everybody healthy. And it's like, nah, it's way too flawed. And now Zach LaVine is a negative asset. And you're right. There's no world.
Moving him is going to be tough.
Yeah, it's going to be real tough. It would have been, I'll tell you, it would have been a lot easier if they would have got a pick back in the Caruso deal that they could attach to it. And the reason they didn't, one, because they could have moved him at multiple times. Sometimes timing is leverage. So they could have moved him years ago at the trade deadline, whatever. So he was extremely coveted. Any contender would have given up a pick for him, if not two, at certain points. So yeah, to not get a pick for him is disastrous. To not get a pick for DeRozan is less disastrous, but you still probably could have. The reason that they didn't is because they're also cheap, because the 2031, I believe it's the Kings. I'm not sure who it's coming through. It may be the Kings' actual pick, but they gave up the 2031 pick, I believe, to the Spurs, who kind of, were in the middle of all this, and they only had to give up Harrison Barnes, who, and what, the Bulls can't take on Harrison Barnes for a pick, because it would have put them over the whatever it was, the apron, or they wouldn't have wanted to go into it. They didn't want Barnes' salary, so Barnes goes elsewhere, and somebody else gets the pick that they should have gotten. And so not only are they seem, if not incompetent, super procrastinating on trading these guys. They also are cheap. And so they end up with
procrastinating, and incompetence is a circle in Chicago.
Yeah, and so yeah, they could have got a pick out of that DeRozan thing, and they didn't want Harrison Barnes' money.
It doesn't explain that. Like, the timing here for everybody was the trade deadline, right? Like, okay, Caruso, they could do it in the offseason, that's fine, but they still screwed that up. DeMar DeRozan and Andre Drummond, the Sixers wanted to get Andre Drummond last year at the trade deadline and offered the Chicago Bulls multiple second-round picks. And the Chicago Bulls, for reasons surpassing understanding, passed on that. And so instead, Andre Drummond left. And where did he end up? In Philadelphia, where the Sixers went, thank you so much, Chicago Bulls. We signed the guy that we wanted to sign as the backup big to Joel Embiid, who worked here previously, and we still have those second-round picks. DeMar DeRozan, same deal. Time to move him was last year. For whatever reason, they're still holding on to Vooch. I like Vooch just fine, but the longer you hold on to him, the more that he diminishes in value. Zach LaVine.
They didn't forget holding on to him. They just gave him a new deal. Like, I think late last year they re-signed. Yeah,
we didn't even get to them giving Patrick Williams 5 years and $90 million. What are they? This honestly, I'm blown away by it, but it might be the worst front office in the NBA. I think it is.
Well, once you start the momentum of trying to hold on to these guys, and now you don't get any picks for DeRozan, and now LaVine's a negative asset, and now you didn't get anything for Drummond, and you didn't get anything for DeRozan, and then it's like, well, if we lose Patrick Williams for nothing, he's not tradable. Now he's our first-round pick, and we didn't get it. Well, so then you start to convince yourself, we've already lost all these other guys for nothing. Now we can't lose Patrick Williams for nothing. Same thing with Vooch. It's like his market value is not going to get you a first-round pick, so it's like, well, let's just give him more money then. And you just start to multiply these mistakes because you don't ever want to just cut the cord. And they've
I don't know.
If you want to look for like one positive, it's like, and I like Giddey. I'm like super against people who can't shoot. I hate drafting the Alfred Paytons and the Emmanuel Mudiay's and the Chris Dunns and all these guys that were going in the first round. They can't shoot. It's ridiculous. But I do like Josh Giddey. I thought my optimism on him was validated in the Olympics when he has the ball in his hands. He absolutely cannot be an off-ball player. So I think he's going to be pretty good in Chicago with the ball in his hands. But, I mean –
So was Kobe White, who had a year where he stepped forward last year, is he off ball now? And by the way, Zach LaVine's coming back, and he likes the ball too.
I know it doesn't fit. I'm gonna, again, maybe they're incompetent, but I don't think there's any way you can trade for Josh Giddey instead of getting picks for Caruso unless Giddey's going to be your focal point. If you're bringing Giddey to do what he was doing in OKC when he wasn't even playable, yeah, we might really have to start having the incompetent conversation. I just have to think they're going to put the ball in his hands. He's a triple-double guy with the ball in his hands. And so he's pretty good. And that's the only way you can justify that. I still would rather have the picks, but it's the only way you can say, hey, we're going to –
could have had picks and Giddey. I mean, like, I don't know. I don't know what they're doing.
They could have had the pick, if they wouldn't have got cheap. But they could have just said, forget the players. We're going to go all picks for these guys, and then just fill the money out some other way. But they weren't going to get Giddey and a bunch of picks, maybe one. And so they committed to Giddey. And it's sort of like the Raptors with Quickly, and Barrett. They could have got picks for Anunoby. They certainly could have got picks for him, but they took the players. They want to be good. They want They don't want to go back and start using picks. And so Quickly's good. Barrett's good. I think those guys actually are right in the range of Giddey. So the Raptors and the Bulls kind of did the same thing. Raptors are a little bit better than the Bulls. But, yeah, you're a bad team with depreciating assets in Vooch and Levine. And you bring in Giddey, whatever.
They're a bad team with depreciating assets that's hard capped at the first apron. I mean, it's bad in like 12 different ways. And I don't know how they're going to get off of the Zach LaVine contract. Best move, you're going, it sounds like, having Giddey and giving him the ball, I guess. For me, the worst move is everything else.
Yeah.
Like everything, this team is an absolute disaster. And that's saying something because we're about to talk about the Detroit Pistons. And I think I'd rather be the Pistons right now than the Chicago Bulls.
It's not, I don't think I'd have to think, put some thought into this, but I can't imagine there's a team in the league I'd less rather be than the Bulls. It's terrible.
I mean, then you're getting into the Wizards conversation, the Blazers, whatever. But yeah, I'd rather be those teams moving forward than the Chicago Bulls because they have really handcuffed themselves to a terrible team, and they made so many bad decisions. But that's enough Chicago Bulls for probably a lifetime. Detroit Pistons, last team in the Central Division that we're going to get into here, Brad. 14-68 last year, the worst team in the NBA. They were bad on offense, they were bad on defense. But the good news is they have a ton of money, and that worked out really well for one Tobias Harris, who everybody was thrilled to see leave Philadelphia. He gets a 2-year deal for $50 million. His dad is his agent. I hope Tobias bought him a house or something.
Yeah.
He keeps getting paid, and I like Tobias. He's one of the nicest guys. He's super professional. He really benefited here from Detroit looking around and going, look, we're setting this up to, we already gave the keys to Cade Cunningham, who got extended on a 5-year max extension for $224 million. It's his team moving forward. That's fine. But they set themselves up. They're $46 million, Brad, under the salary cap. They're just going to be a dumping ground for bad contracts this year, and they're happy to do it. And it makes sense. This is at least a team that when they bring in Trajan Langdon, right, that Troy Weaver goes out and he's going to run the front office now. They have a plan at least.
I agree. I've referenced this philosophy a couple of times today. Expectations are always the root of frustration. And with Tobias Harris, once they gave him all that money in Philadelphia, the expectations got so high that you were nothing but frustrated with him. And he seems to waggle between these two realities, which is where he's an overpaid guy on a team that expects to win that can't be as good as his money suggests he should be, or he's just a guy that makes a ton of money on a terrible team that nobody cares about. If you put Tobias Harris as the fourth guy on a competing team, Tobias Harris is a good player, and Tobias Harris he can create his own shot when he's only has to do it 5 times a game when the shot clock goes down and the matchup dictates it, but not when he has to be a go-to guy. He's a good player, and but he's gone the money route, and the Sixers had to give him because they went and they did Butler and they traded for him, and then they couldn't, they had to do it. So, good for him, but he's not going to change the trajectory of this team. You're right. They do have a plan. I would push back on a little bit. They're drafting for upside. That's what they've done. They're not drafting for fit at all. Nobody can shoot on this team. Nobody. Yeah. And so Cade Cunningham and Ivy are guys that need space to do what they do. And they just have high school level spacing. Thompson, one of the worst shooters maybe ever in the NBA. Duran's not a shooter. He's not a stretch shooter. And now they draft this Holland kid who's a great athlete. A lot of people think he has the highest upside in the draft, but he can't shoot. It's always this. I heard this for years with all these guys. They were Elfrid Payton. I keep referencing him, but it's he sees the court. He's long. He's got length. He handles the ball. He's a great passer. He all these things, IQ, but he can't shoot. And it screws everything up. Ricky Rubio can't shoot, but it's and now they're doing it with Holland where he can do all these other things, high ceiling athlete, long wings are never been more important in the NBA, but he can't shoot. And so they really have to find out, and this is what this entire season comes down to for the Pistons. We know Cunningham is the guy. All those other guys on the team, Duran, Ivy, now Holland, Thompson, They need to figure out which two of those guys they're going to keep with Cunningham and which two of those guys they're going to give up on, and go get assets for them. Because they cannot, once you want to be a functional team that is actually in pursuit of winning and you're no longer in let's see what we got mode, you can't win with this. Nobody can shoot. Nobody. So they have to go get spacing.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. But they kind of took a gap year on figuring out what they have last year because Monty, I don't know if it was a directive from Troy Weaver or whatever, but last year at the beginning of the season, Asar Thompson came out like gangbusters. And then all of a sudden, Monty was like, you know what? You've been playing a little too well. We're going to stick you on the bench and we're going to play Bojan Bogdanovic to showcase him for a trade that everybody already knows what he is anyway. He's a known quantity. It made no sense to me. I want to see what Asar Thompson is. I want to see what Ivy and Cunningham look like. Look, yes. And also, by the way, it doesn't matter if it doesn't work this season because they would love to tank for Cooper Flagg just like everybody else. So if they're bad again, that's fine. I just think like they've kind of picked a direction here with Trajan Langdon. I thought, moving on from Monty, look, they're going to pay him $65 million to not coach for them. That was a mistake before, right? But maybe it wasn't a good fit because Monty, they had to like talk him into taking that job, and like he wasn't playing the kids, and it was just wonky rotations. And so now you go to JB, and we'll see what happens. But best moment for me from the offseason was setting themselves up with all this cap space. And then the worst moment, paying Monty $65 million to not coach is brutal.
Yeah,
brutal. What do you got for best and worst before we wrap this thing?
The worst is, there's no doubt Monty Williams. I mean,
it's not my money, but that's a lot. That's a lot.
Unbelievable. And it's also just like these teams. There's like, I wrote about this like a month ago. There's like 5 coaches in the league that actually move the needle on a team. That's the bottom line.
Yes.
Every other coach,
I say this all the time.
They're good. They're good coaches. They're all good. They're fine. But the Hawks thought they were going to be like decidedly different with Quinn Snyder instead of Nate McMillan. And the Bucks thought they were going to be different with Griffin and Budenholzer and then Rivers instead of Griffin. And the Suns think they're going to be different with Budenholzer instead of Vogel. And the Lakers thought they were going to be different with Ham instead of Vogel. And it's like there's like honestly like 4 coaches. And Steve Kerr, I think, was the epitome of showing how much a difference a coach can make when he got effectively the same roster that Mark Jackson left that was 12th in offense and fighting.
I hope producer Aaron's really listening to this part.
Yeah, well,
we get too much hate on Steve Kerr on the show.
It's because you stick around long enough, you become the villain. But it's
crazy. The guy, just wins. All he does is win, and people are like, who's terrible, Steve Kerr. I'm like, how is that?
He's a good coach. He does get stubborn with some things, and once you've won and you get spoiled by that, you start to nitpick. But you're not going to find many teams that are that ready to win and are being that undercoached. And so aside from that, these guys that kind of turn these coaches over, like, JB's fine. He's not going to change anything in Detroit. The bottom line is they've got, and context does matter because you say it doesn't matter that they stink, and that's true in terms of record. But you can't really find out what Cunningham and specifically Ivy. I think we know Cunningham's good, but you can't find out what Ivy can be when there's no space. Like it's so cramped. They can't do what they're supposed to do. I actually think you mentioned Thompson. He was great when he first started out. He's can be like an Iguodala, but he has to be on the right team to be that. I actually think he's the second guy that I think is probably a staple of the team with Cunningham. They need to spend this year figuring out the rest of the guys. The best move, I think, is putting hopefully somebody in place in Bickerstaff that will put out the type of lineups that will at least allow them to see what they have in the proper context, so that they don't end up getting rid of Ivy because they have no spacing and he goes somewhere else that has spacing and is awesome. They've got to get their context right to properly evaluate what they have. The other side note I would have is a win, and this coming from a Warriors guy. They got rid of James Wiseman is so hard to watch. And Monty Williams was going to him. It was like, James Wiseman is not a good basketball player. I'm so tired of hearing about the versatility and the height and the length. I heard it from the Warriors. It's like if you watch his instincts, he almost doesn't know where to go. It's like, get the dude off the court. So I guess that's a minor win where it's just like, we forgot about him. Didn't he go to Indiana?
He went to Indiana.
That could have been the Pacers' worst. Maybe that was we missed.
Yeah. They paid him. They paid him to play basketball. Not a great idea. As we wrap the show here, you had mentioned they need some spacing to see how these guys work. So for all of my Detroit Piston fan listeners here, get excited about Tobias Harris corner threes. He's going to plant himself over in the corner, and he's going to jack up threes, and he will make them sometimes. So good luck with all that. This was super fun. We love having you on the show, Brad. Go read all of Brad's stuff over at cbssports.com. He's constantly cranking out good copy. Be sure to do that. We're going to continue our division deep dive series, as I mentioned, all this week. We're going to be back on Wednesday with the Atlantic Division. Bill Ryder will join me there to break down the Boston Celtics, the New York Knicks, the Sixers, everybody in the Atlantic Division. That'll be super fun. But for now, for Brad Botkin, thank you again, Brad. I'm John Gonzalez. We thank you guys for tuning in, and we'll see you on Wednesday.